Um, yeah, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Maggie is a senior policy advisor and state legislative liaison for Seattle Public Utilities. In her role, Maggie works with the state legislature to advocate for policies and funding investments that support SB's community-centered One Water, Zero Waste vision. She received a Master of Public Administration from the UW Evans School and a Master of Arts degree in sociology from UW. Please join me in welcoming Maggie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm excited to see all of your faces. Hi. Yeah, so I wanted to just highlight, as Cyril just mentioned, that my background is actually in sociology. So I'm a social scientist and I work on environmental policy now. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved with the environmental policy movement. So I'll just explain a little bit. So I work for Seattle Public Utilities. We are a municipally owned drinking water, sewer and stormwater, and solid waste utility. We serve drinking water to the greater King County region, so over 1.6 million people. And then sewer and stormwater and solid waste services we provide just to the city of Seattle. And we are a part of the city of Seattle. My job, my official title is Senior Policy Advisor and State Legislative Liaison. What that means is I'm basically a lobbyist. So I work with the state legislature. I live and work full time in Olympia during the legislative session. And my job includes a lot of outreach, relationship building, coalition building, and policy development in coordination with my subject matter experts. So I really am a liaison between the utility and all of our external partners. I'm constantly working in collaboration with those partners, and that is everyone from environmental nonprofits, state agencies, legislators, other utilities, other cities, counties. So as much as possible, we're trying to work in collaboration and hand in hand with partners to achieve our goals. Part of my job is that I help set Seattle Public Utilities legislative agenda each year going into the next legislative cycle. And I really do think I have the coolest job because everything on our legislative agenda, because we're a very progressive utility and part of the city, is that almost everything on our agenda is really focused on environmental policy and race and social justice and equity. So this year we have 5 items on our legislative agenda, and every year we're looking at how do we move towards zero waste? How do we ensure that there's enough water and clean and safe water for all of our residents in the Seattle area for the future and considering climate change? How do we get toxins out of our pipes and our streets so they don't end up in Puget Sound and harm our salmon populations and our human health? So those are all some of the priorities that we're working on. And I wanted to just give you all a couple examples of some of the policies that I've been working on. Either I'm still working on them or we recently were successful. So I'll start with what's known as the WRAP Act. It's a big recycling policy that will overhaul the way our recycling system in Washington State is funded. So it's what's called an extended producer responsibility program for packaging and paper. And it would require the producers of packaging and paper. So that's like Amazon, Coca-Cola, Nestle, the big corporations that are making decisions about what packaging is in grocery stores and ends up in your homes. It would require those companies to pay for curbside recycling for all Washington residents. Right now, I mean, when you think about it, that burden is falling on residents and it's falling on local governments. And without any financial incentive from companies, they're not going to change their behavior. They can put out 1 million cardboard boxes and it doesn't make any difference to them, right? And then we're stuck on the back end paying for that recycling. And, you know, maybe many of you have seen articles and, you know, things in the news about where is that material actually going? Is it actually being recycled? And those are really fair concerns, especially with plastics. There's just some materials that we don't know where they're going. And there's actually some evidence that's showing that they're being sold to developing countries. And a lot of the contamination that's in that recycling is then being left in these countries and in these communities that really, they're stuck bearing the burden of our trash. That's really not okay. So I've been super excited my last 2 years with Seattle Public Utilities to be able to champion this legislation. It's a huge piece of public policy and there's a lot of opposition, as you can imagine. So it's been kind of like trying to, roll a boulder up a mountain. But I do feel really optimistic that in 2025 we could pass this bill. And I'll just go through some of the really exciting things that the bill would accomplish. So first of all, it would just increase our rate of recycling in general. In Washington, over half of recyclable materials are still going to landfills. So under the bill, there would be so much more materials that would be collected, and there would be less reliance on virgin materials, just more recycling in general, which would be a huge greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So, I think a lot of times we struggle with this connect between, like, some people are like, oh, recycling is my one climate action that I do. And then other people are like, well, recycling doesn't actually do anything for climate. And it's like somewhere in the middle, there is a big impact if we're all recycling and we're all making sure that it really is going to a final end market and being made into a new thing, it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's also would be a big race and social justice win because we'd be saving all residents money on their recycling bills. And that is a burden that is only increasing over time as the cost of that service goes up. We'd also have more transparency and accountability in where materials end up, and we would ensure that they go to a responsible end market. And just overall, we would have a much better and more efficient recycling system. More green jobs would be created. We would incentivize innovation in packaging design. Recycling would be easier to understand because we'd have a statewide list of recyclable materials. So there's so many benefits that would come from this policy. So it's been really fun. It's definitely a challenging political dynamic, and I'm happy to delve into that if anyone's curious. But that has been a really fun policy to work on. And then I just wanted to offer 2 other examples of policies that I've been able to advocate for that have been really rewarding. So we're always looking for opportunities to support upstream toxic pollution prevention. A couple of years ago, I was able to support a proposal that would ban the sale of cosmetic products and personal care products that contain 9 toxic chemicals. So that includes forever chemicals, PFAS, included formaldehyde, lead, like all these toxic things that I didn't know were in shampoo and conditioner and deodorant and makeup and like things that we're putting on our bodies every day. And ultimately those are also getting washed down our drains. They're going into sewers and they're ending up in Puget Sound in our rivers. So it's really exciting that our utility is so proactive about looking upstream at not just, once we are receiving this polluted water, what do we do about it? But also like, let's look upstream, make sure it's not getting into your homes, into your bodies in the first place. So that bill passed, which was super exciting. And then the last issue that we have an interesting intersection with is actually salmon recovery. So we are a drinking water utility. We own 2 watersheds, and there are dams on those watersheds. So we own and operate a hatchery on the Cedar River. We're also stormwater managers, and maybe some of you have seen in the news, there's a chemical in tires that it's dust and it comes off your tires, it ends up on roads, and then it washes down storm drains. And we as the city of Seattle are responsible for all of that stormwater. And that dust is getting into streams and it's killing salmon. So there's a lot of intersections and with salmon recovery, and we know that Chinook salmon and sockeye salmon are Chinook are considered endangered, and sockeye have had really poor returns for many years. So whatever we can do to support culvert removal, address predators in Lake Washington, support research into how do we mitigate for toxic chemicals are all opportunities where I would work with partners and advocate to the legislature for investments to help improve salmon recovery, which is very exciting. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions. Thanks again for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Maggie. We'll do questions at the end. We want to get through all of our speakers. Yeah, I think it's really interesting how many initiatives the public utilities is working on and just how many parts of the environment it touches. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker now, Jimmy, who's in person. Jimmy is the Climate Resilience Strategy Planner at Washington State Department of Ecology, where he works to support a team of interagency partners responsible for developing the state's climate resilience strategy. Prior to this role, Jimmy was an environmental consultant working to facilitate stakeholder-led processes related to salmon recovery and management throughout the Pacific Northwest. Before that, he worked on federal policy related to oceans and fisheries for a U.S. Senator from Hawaii. He has a master's degree in marine affairs from the University of Washington and studied microbiology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join me in welcoming Jimmy.
Also, hi, Maggie. It's a small world for the environmental field, but there's also many ways to get involved. I sort of said I have a degree in microbiology that I do not use at all. So it was great foundation in the field. So lots of ways to get into environmental policy. Jimmy Kroll, I'm the Climate Resilience Strategy Planner at the Department of Ecology. The Department of Ecology is sort of like the state equivalent of the EPA, manages a whole host of environmental issues across Washington state, everything from air quality and water quality to nuclear waste, and consumer products and other things like that. So it's a really big agency that covers lots of environmental issues. I specifically focus on climate resilience. Ecology also does a lot of work on climate change. We are the lead agency for implementing the Climate Commitment Act, which I believe Fitzgibbon will be speaking about, which really focuses on reducing emissions and that part of the climate equation. But the part that I work on is on climate resilience. So how can we prepare and protect communities, infrastructure, and natural and working lands in Washington for the impacts of climate change? So all the work that I do is really driven by the science. We work really closely with partners here at UW with the Climate Impacts Group. And they give us a lot of information about what the biggest climate threats facing Washington are. So for our state, that's things like reduced water availability and drought, extreme heat, coastal changes like sea level rise, wildfires and smoke, and then flooding as well. And so what I've been working on for the past year is developing the state's climate resilience strategy. So in 2023, the legislature passed a law that directed Ecology to lead this effort with 9 other state agencies to develop a strategy and really chart a path forward for agencies to work together in preparing for climate impacts, to work towards common goals and shared outcomes to make sure that we're doing that efficiently and delivering for people and communities in the state. So collaboration was a really key part of that. As I mentioned, there's 10 total agencies that worked on the strategy. And each of those agencies has their own special areas of expertise, different sort of views on different topics, and often a lot of overlap and sometimes even conflict around shared issues. And so that process, it was challenging at times, but ultimately these solutions for climate resilience really need to be collaborative and to have as many people involved as possible to make sure that we're meeting the goals and meeting the needs of people in the state. So we published the climate resilience strategy on September 30th, so just a few weeks ago, after about a year of putting it together. And what the strategy does is it outlines 8 strategies that our agencies will follow to build climate resilience for people, natural and working lands, and infrastructure in Washington. Under each of these actions, our agencies have developed really clear and specific actions that they'll take to build that resilience. So for example, we have one strategy that's focused on water issues and water availability, a really big deal here in Washington. The science, it shows us that, snowpack in our mountains traditionally is a great source of water over the summer months as it slowly melts. But as climate changes, that snow will have less snow and more rainfall. And so that rain will really quickly move through systems and not be held in the mountains in the snow. And so we'll have to figure out ways to, prepare for that, prepare for more droughts, and be more, have better efficiency for our water usage. So one of the actions that Ecology has proposed is to look at different sort of irrigation efficiencies. So to work with partners in the agricultural sector to look for ways to improve their access to water, improve the efficiency of the water that they have, reduce leakages and things like that, while also making sure that we have water for salmon and wildlife and for people as well too. So as I mentioned, there's these 8 different strategies. They all focus on one particular area of climate resilience, and then agencies have developed these actions. We've backed up these actions with budget requests to the governor's office and the state legislature to make sure that we can get resources to actually implement these actions and make sure that we can really deliver on them. We just finished the strategy, and so now we're sort of moving into our implementation phase. So over the next couple months, we're gonna work with our partners to continue to look at the actions that they put together, see where we can start to make some progress. And then as we move into legislative session, we'll see what resources we can get to implement those actions. Another really critical part of this work and climate resilience work in general is measuring your progress to see if you're making a difference, if you're delivering climate resilient outcomes for people in the state. And so our partners at the Climate Impacts Group here at EDEB really critical in that. They developed a really robust and really great monitoring program for our strategy. And so they've identified different metrics that they'll measure to see if our actions are making a difference, if they're working towards the shared goals that we've identified. And then they also have a set of indicators that will help us see if we're really reaching that climate resilient future that we want here in Washington. So this is something I would encourage you to all look into. We just published the strategy. It's on our website. Lots of great information there. We're required to update the strategy every 4 years. So that public engagement and feedback will continue to be a really important part of our work. And then we'll be reporting progress on implementing the strategy in 2 years. So yeah, happy to answer questions after. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that we go through the strategy. I think it's has lots of important issues covered. Now I'd like to hand it over to Megan to introduce our final 2 speakers.
Yeah, thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Washington State Representative Joe Fitzgibbon.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you all of you for taking some time to chat tonight. So I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I'm a member of the Washington State House of Representatives. I currently serve as the Majority Leader in the State House. But before I was Majority Leader, I served as chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee. And when I was in that role, we passed a number of landmark climate change laws, including the Clean Fuel Standard, the Clean Electricity Law, and the Climate Commitment Act. And the Climate Commitment Act is on the ballot this fall. There's an initiative proposed that would repeal it, Initiative 2117. And I have been spending most of this year working to talk to people about the reasons why we should vote no on Initiative 2117 because of the importance of protecting our climate law and protecting the investments that it enables, as well as the fact that it is the only law we have that guarantees that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a safe level. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So the Climate Commitment Act, we passed into law in the Washington State Legislature, and Governor Inslee signed it in 2021. What it requires is that we cap Washington's greenhouse gas pollution and lower that cap over time until it achieves net zero emissions by 2050. I know we would all love that for that to be a little bit faster, but we are trying to balance the speed of reductions with the cost of those reductions. And the law has been in effect since the beginning of 2023. The initiative that is proposed right now, Initiative 2117, the folks who are promoting that initiative are saying you should vote for it because it will make gasoline cheaper. There is no question that the Climate Commitment Act requires the 100 largest polluters in Washington state, which includes our oil refineries, to pay the state of Washington for the cost of the cost that pollution inflicts on the rest of us, the cost of the climate harms, the cost of the air quality harms, and so forth. And so we asked the 100 largest polluters in the state to go to auctions, 4 times a year, to buy at auction their allowances for their share of pollution that they are required to account for to the state of Washington. And with the proceeds from those auctions, which so far have been about $3 billion in the first 2 years of the program, we have invested in transportation, in wildfire prevention, in salmon recovery, and in various kinds of greenhouse gas reduction across the state. To the degree the money is going to transportation, it is very focused on transportation strategies that reduce emissions, like electrification of our ferry system, incentives for medium and heavy duty trucks that are zero emissions, so transitioning diesel trucks to electric trucks in things like freight trucks and garbage trucks and school buses. This law is really the one that underpins all of the climate laws we have as a state, and it is the one law that we have that guarantees that emissions actually go down over time. Initiative 2117, the proponents of which, again, talk a lot about how it will make your gasoline cheaper. We don't believe there's any guarantee of that. We think that the oil companies will certainly see a savings if they don't have to pay the Department of Ecology, if they don't have to go to auction to acquire allowances for the share of their emissions that impact Washingtonians. We don't think there's any guarantee that the oil companies would pass along that savings to Washingtonians at the pump, but it would certainly guarantee that we would lose billions of dollars of investments in transportation and salmon recovery, in clean energy, and in wildfire prevention. One resource that I would invite you to peruse at your leisure is a map put together by the Clean and Prosperous Institute, which is an organization that basically convenes businesses and folks who are not traditionally as aligned with the environmental movement or with the climate fight, to talk about sort of how businesses can support the fight against climate change. And the Clean and Prosperous Institute has put together this map, risk of repeal, which I will put in the chat, which shows basically all of the projects in Washington State that have been funded by the Climate Commitment Act so far, and talks about sort of what category they're in. Is this a salmon recovery project? Is this an electric vehicle charging station? Is this transportation system improvement, or so on? And what the likelihood is that it would be defunded if this initiative were to pass into law. So I would invite you to look at that link, which I know that you are, many of you are in person, and so may not see the link, but I will hope to find a way to get it to you. That if you just Google risk of repeal, that will be the top result, and you can zoom in on your neighborhood and identify what are the projects that are at greatest risk of going away if Initiative 2117 were to pass into law. Just zooming out a little bit, why does Washington have a cap on our greenhouse gas pollution? We are one of only 2 states that has a cap on our greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide, us and California. We are the only 2 states that have done this so far. The northeastern states have a program. The northeastern U.S. have a program like this, but it only covers the electricity sector. It's been very effective in the electricity sector. It's really helped the northeastern U.S. Get off of coal and gas, particularly coal, but increasingly gas, and move towards renewables. That's been great, but they don't cover, for example, emissions from buildings, particularly for heating buildings. That's a significant share of emissions both in the Northeast and in the Northwest. And they don't cover emissions from transportation fuels, which we do. That is really what sets us in California apart from the other jurisdictions in the U.S. that have a cap program on their greenhouse gas emissions. Um, while we have great laws targeted at transportation emissions, at building emissions, at electricity emissions, the only law that covers all the sectors and that actually guarantees that those emissions go down over time is the Climate Commitment Act, which is the one that is under threat by the initiative that we will be voting on 27 days from now. So um, I I think Washington should be proud of and deserves to be proud of our climate leadership. I don't think there's any state besides California that can compete with us as far as the ambition of the climate laws that we've passed. But that will only be true if we vote no on Initiative 2117. If that initiative does pass, we are going to see huge harms to our salmon recovery efforts, to our transportation systems, and most of all to our work to fight climate change. So that is why I am spending most of my time this year talking to folks about Initiative 2117 and the harms that it would inflict on Washingtonians. And I will leave it there.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Fitzgibbon. This was actually the perfect introduction to our next panelist, who is going to be actually showcasing that map that Representative Fitzgibbon was just mentioning. Zach Pinnard is here from the Clean and Prosperous Institute. I actually had the pleasure of working with Zach on this project a few months ago. Zach is the GIS specialist for Clean and Prosperous Institute, and actually they're to develop the map. And yeah, he's going to show us how to use the map and the importance of it.
Perfect. Great to see you again, Megan. Can I share my screen here? There you go. Can you all see the risk of repeal webpage there? All good? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So if you go to that link that was that Representative Fitzgibbon mentioned in the chat, then you'll come across this homepage. Scroll down a little bit, you'll see the mapping tool. And so I'm just going to do a little demo here about basically if you want to explore more about what the Climate Commitment Act is investing in. So this is kind of like any other online map, Google Maps. You can pan, zoom into whatever neighborhood is interesting to you. I'll try and slow down. I know with the zoom, sometimes there's a bit of a lag. But yeah, so let's say you can zoom into Seattle. You can like pan over here. Let's say you're interested in projects in Wenatchee. You can like look over there. If you want to click on a specific project like this one, then a pop-up window will come up. It'll give you some, basic information about that specific project. So like this one's Safe Routes to School program at Orchard Middle School. You can like go down, see how much funding it's getting, what investment category it's in. This one's active transportation, the risk level, that kind of stuff. And then, there's this about investment. So it looks like this one is like a new marked crosswalk, rapid flashing beacons. Basically so it looks like this project makes it safer for kids to walk to school as opposed to using a car. So it's a very like on the ground example of how the Climate Commitment Act's dollars are being used, to support Washington communities. But that's just sort of at a surface level. Here, I'm going to show you all the different bells and whistles that I can that we put on this map to make it suitable for all types of analysis that you want to do. So as Representative Fitzgibbon said, one of the different investments that the Climate Commitment Act is making for Washington is in salmon recovery. So let's say you want to, focus specifically on these types of salmon-related projects, and of a program called the Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Project or series of investments. You can type that into this search bar on the upper left, hit enter, and then the map will automatically filter to those specific projects. And so as you can see, you can explore those projects where they're taking place. And if you scroll down here, not only does the map show that, but there's this over in the bottom left-hand corner, there's this dynamic text field that basically aggregates all the different, or it sums up the funding that each of those projects that are on the map is getting. So in this case, it's almost $42 million from the Climate Commitment Act is going to these Brian Abbott fish barrier removal projects. So that's how you can really get a much more quantitative understanding of just how much, how much investment is taking place as a result, direct result of the Climate Commitment Act. To get some more analysis about it, you can click this little arrow here, it brings up a table, and this table is, is linked with your search results. So these are all the different fish barrier projects that I typed in there. There's a total of 53 of them. These are the ones that we were able to map. Not every project has a specific enough location yet that we're able to find a specific, spot on the map to put an icon. So that's what this unmapped investments tab here is for. So there are 3 of this particular type of project that haven't been mapped yet, and you can get, more information than what comes up in the pop-up window here. If you kind of scroll to the right, basically, so yeah, that's the table. Let's see what else. And then the filters is a big deal here. As you can see, let's go back home here. As you can see, there's a bunch of different types of icons that correspond to different types of investments that the CCA is, that revenues from the CCA is being used to invest in. So let's say you want to focus specifically on transportation projects. That's a really broad category. There are a lot of different transportation projects out there. So you can filter to active transportation, electric transportation, ferries. Let's say you're interested in ferries too, and public transit. That'll be a good, subset of transportation projects there. Then you can see the map updates automatically. So does the table down here with your specific qualifications here. If you want to only focus on the ones that are at the highest risk of, being repealed along with the CCA, these would be projects that like the funding is more kind of down the road. It's not in this biennium. It's like it's years in advance is how the project is going to be funded. Then obviously if the CCA gets repealed, if 2117 passes, then those funds won't be available for these projects. So you can focus on the high risk ones here. And here you're looking specifically at projects that the CCA is funding that it's unlikely the funding would be able to continue if the CCA were repealed. Let's say you want to, narrow it down even further. If you're specifically interested in environmental justice, you want to know which of these projects are taking place in overburdened communities that are designated by, say, the University of Washington's Environmental Health Disparities Map, or the Department of Ecology's overburdened communities with disproportionate, disproportionately bad air pollution levels. You can select overburdened communities here as a filter, and the map will update to those as well. And let's see. And if finally you can filter down to county or legislative district, let's say you're interested in Spokane, then you can look at Spokane County, and the map will update just over there. Let's see, we'll zoom specifically to Spokane. And you can see all of these projects, these 4 are, specifically transportation related, at the highest risk level in an overburdened community in Spokane County. So this type of analysis, is the type of thing we're hoping, a whole bunch of different people and organizations can use to look at whatever types of projects they're interested in. And if you want to reset the filters, you just click this button right here. You can go back to the home page, and then the last the last 2 things up in this upper right corner I wanted to mention. If you just want to find a place, let's say like my aunt lives in Vancouver. If she wants to see what projects or what investments are taking place near her house, she can type in her address. I hope y'all don't memorize my aunt's address here. But we can zoom into her house there, and then you can like zoom out and she can see, oh, Looks like there are some electric vehicle charging stations that the CCA is investing around her neighborhood. Zoom out a little more, there's some public transportation investments going on further down Mill Plain there. So you can do that with any address. You could also, do it just landmarks. This is kind of like a Google Maps type thing. So you can see what's going on in different places up there. And then the last relevant kind of layers we wanted to make sure that you could see or easily, compare with where the projects are investing are tribal reservations and then overburdened communities, either like from the Department of Ecology or from the Environmental Health Disparities Ring. So if you turn those layers on, the reservations show up in red. You can click on them to see which reservation it is. The Environmental Health Disparities districts come up in purple, and the Department of Ecology's overburdened districts come up in yellow. So that's kind of a general overview of the map. Oh, and this one here, my boss would want me to mention this. We have a little Easter egg where there's a school-related tag. If you're interested specifically in projects that have to do with schools, you can type in school-related into the search bar, and it'll filter the map down to those and the table as well. So yeah, that's a little general overview of how to use the map and how to basically see, a lot of this type of overall statewide policy talk can be a little bit opaque. So I think it's great to have this type of resource to really be able to visualize exactly what this is doing for the state, where the projects are taking place, and to sort of demonstrate that it's real. It's not just like different people saying things. There are specific projects with specific funding amounts and specific locations that you can go look at and explore around your neighborhood or anywhere you want. So with that, I'll leave it there, and yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Zach. We will make sure to share the link to that map across our socials and messaging so that everyone can check it out. I definitely recommend spending some time with it, and I think you'll learn a lot.
Mhm.
Zach worked really hard to make
Yeah.
it.
And you helped a lot too, Megan. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, please join me in our round of applause to our speakers. Yeah, now we're gonna move to, we have a good amount of time for some questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to load them up. You also have a Slido that will pull up right now. Where you can scan the QR code and ask questions privately.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a standard project because I don't know like a whole lot about how the auctions for emissions work, but how does that kind of interact with like carbon credits? I'm not sure are carbon credits like a federal thing. I don't know how it really interacts. Whoever can answer that, I guess Mr. Fitzgibbon, if you
Can you all hear the question?
Yeah, I think I could hear the question. I will take a crack at it, and if I don't answer it, then just let me know and I'll see if I can. I might just say I don't know, or I might try to refine my answers. So the I think what I heard was, how do the auctions and the requirement that the 100 largest polluters in Washington acquire allowances at auction, how does that intersect with or overlap with carbon credits that businesses buy? And so the distinction I would make is that some businesses choose to buy carbon offsets under essentially a voluntary market. They want to be able to say that they have offset all of their emissions, and so they go to, there's several different um, systems, I guess, that exist for carbon offsets that a business that is looking to offset all of their emissions can go say, look, we've bought we emit 100,000 tons a year of CO2, and we've bought offsets to account for 100,000 tons of CO2 a year. So that means that we're carbon neutral. The main downside of that is that in part because there's multiple systems that offer those offsets, there's multiple private businesses as well as nonprofits that offer offsets. There's not a lot of consistency or certainty that those offsets are verifiable. So, for example, if you buy an offset that says a owner of a bunch of forest land is going to delay clear cutting that forest land by 10 years in order to enable those trees to sequester an additional 10 years of carbon. Well, of course, they may be sequestering additional carbon during that 10 years, but then at the end of the 10 years, if they clear cut the land anyway, then that carbon sequestration benefit is not ongoing. There's also been there's been a lot of coverage recently. There's been coverage, I think, as long as there's been carbon offsets, about the ways in which carbon offsets can be abused. One of the ways in which a lot of businesses were really excited to buy offsets for many years was buying these stoves for folks in Africa who were cooking over open flames, cooking over, like burning wood to cook their food. And this very popular method of providing carbon offsets was to provide basically like these very rudimentary stoves to households in Africa so that they could use less wood to heat their food, to cook their food, and less wood, and then therefore less smoke and particulate matter, but also less greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the things that in retrospect has been found is that those stoves weren't very well put together, and most of the households that got those stoves decided not to keep using them because they would like fall apart, and they would rust if there was rain and they were being used outside. There's not rain. So this is just a long way of saying the voluntary market has a lot of weaknesses. The compliance market, the requirement that these 100 largest polluters in Washington state acquire allowances from the state, is pretty airtight. We don't really allow a lot of offsets. To the degree that offsets are allowed under Washington's program, they're not allowed to offset emissions that would go above the legal cap. And so that's kind of a complicated sort of interplay, other than to say we don't allow offsets for very many things. And that to the degree that we do allow offsets under Washington's program, they're extremely tightly regulated. There's only very few sort of pathways by which an offset can be allowed. So again, this is a long way of saying the difference between the voluntary market and the legally required market is that the mandatory market that we have in place in Washington and that is in place in California and Quebec, those are really the only places in the United States where there's a market with this stringency in place, is very tightly regulated and tightly overseen. So you can't do things like buy somebody a stove in Africa and say, I've offset my emissions. There's a much more stringent level of oversight that's required, and at least under the Washington program, and this is a difference that we have with the California program, any offset cannot go above the cap that we've set. So, so I guess this is just an example of where the experience of hindsight of looking at those voluntary markets and the ways in which that they have been, sometimes abused or used by big businesses to say that they were offsetting their emissions when in fact they were not, has informed our approach to make sure that our approach has integrity, and that we can say with credibility that it is actually reducing emissions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll take turns between the online questions and the in-person questions. So we have a question online for Maggie. We want to know what's the most difficult part of getting the RAP Act in process? And that kind of relates to what challenges you face when advocating for laws for Seattle in like the state legislature.
Yeah, definitely. Good question. I think specifically for the RAP Act, it's been a very difficult policy to pass because it's very complicated. It's a really big, complicated policy that's hard to explain when we're in the legislative environment and we have 15 minutes or 5 minutes or 2 minutes to talk to a legislator and convince them that they should vote for this bill. The other piece is that there's so many impacted industries and stakeholders that have taken one issue or another with the bill that we have had to do so much negotiating. And okay, this veterinary industry wants this exemption and this industry wants this exemption, and just going around and hearing everyone's concerns. And now we've gotten to a point where we've basically neutralized most of our stakeholders. But there's still one specific industry that's very strongly opposed. And I would just say the political dynamics are challenging in that, like I said earlier, a big part of my job is relational and having good relationships with other stakeholders and legislators. And that's a big part of this bill too. And that's a big part of our opponent's strategy, is having really good relationships with legislators. And that carries to other bills, although this is definitely the biggest, most challenging bill I have ever had the opportunity to work on.
All right, thank you. Are you able to tell us what the sector is?
Yeah, it is the waste industry. So the companies that are collecting your recycling and taking them to the sorting facilities. So like Waste Management, Republic Services, Recology, that's the industry that's been the most staunchly opposed.
Okay. We have a similar question for Jimmy. You talked about how you have different sectors collaborating with for the climate resilience strategy. Were there any challenges getting some sectors or agencies on board versus others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yes, the short answer. We had 10 total agencies that worked on this. So, I think when people think of climate change, often think of the environmental side of things. So like Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, all these agencies, which were players in our process and had already a lot of work that they did in that space. I think one of the challenging parts for me was other agencies that were involved in our process that didn't necessarily, have that same connection to the issue. So for example, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Health, and some other partners that we had where, small parts of their agencies have, really big roles that they play in climate preparedness and climate resilience. But that broader support at the agency level was, a little more nebulous. And so when we got to the point of developing specific actions and then developing proposals for budget requests to the governor's office and legislature, took a little bit more legwork to show that connection, to show that need. But ultimately, for climate resilience and climate issues more broadly, that full suite of, players is needed for that. And so I think having this opportunity really brought the importance of this issue to the mind of leaders of those agencies, and I think we helpful going forward with that.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
This is a question for whoever wants it. I was wondering, with the salmon recovery project, how do you balance, keeping salmon population stable with the needs of maintaining a stable predator population?
Yeah, can you hear the question, and whoever wants to take that?
Yeah, I just missed the last part. How do you balance the salmon recovery with, what was it?
With the predator population.
Oh, just with competing interests?
Yeah, like especially related to predators, like salmon predator.
Oh, predators. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'd love to talk about this one. So we've supported through the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe has led a budget proviso the last 2 legislative sessions Basically in the Lake Washington Basin, which includes both Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish, there's an overabundance of non-native predatory fish that are eating the juvenile Chinook and sockeye salmon. And so the funding the legislature invested has gone directly to a third party who's gone out in the lake and caught a bunch of those non-native predatory fish. And I've seen all the pictures. They're really fascinating. They like opened up the fish and saw all the baby salmon that they were eating. So they're literally out there actively fishing and trying to remove the non-native predatory fish.
All right, thank you. We're almost at time, so we'll kind of end with our favorite wrap-up question. What gives you, or what makes you excited about the work you're doing, as it relates to environmental policy? And feel free to go to in any order that you can.
I can start. I think for me, the part that excites me the most is just the resilience piece. You have really sort of quick and immediate outcomes. You have agencies can take a lot of action that really directly help people in very real and very tangible ways. Emission reduction is obviously, incredibly important for addressing climate change, but that can be a little bit more nebulous and sort of harder for people to see. But when you can provide an air conditioning unit to someone who doesn't have it, but lives in a really heat-prone place, that provides a really tangible benefit. And so that part of the resilience equation sort of helps me at least get through a lot of the sort of doom that can come up with climate change units.
Yeah, I can say that I am very hopeful about the leadership that the state of Washington has provided on climate change. Climate change is the kind of problem that you can't really solve as one government. Even if it was the United States government, you really need the whole world to engage in moving away from activities that generate greenhouse gas emissions. And but what gives me hope is that I think that the state of Washington is showing that we can do it, that you can reduce your emissions to a safe level, and also have really robust economic growth. And I think that's what other places are looking to learn. There are places that the economy is not as strong as it is in the state of Washington that want to see, can we fight climate change and still have jobs and still have economic growth and still have desirability. And I think what we are in the process of showing here, but we need to follow through on it, we're not done with any of this work by a long shot, is that that our work to reduce emissions and to build more walkable, bikeable communities with good transit and with lower air pollution and with higher quality habitat for the species that we care about makes this a better place to live. Doesn't make this a more expensive place to live with fewer jobs. It makes it a place that has a robust economy with great jobs and also great quality of life. And so I really think it's our job in the state of Washington to show that, so that more places want to do what we're doing. And I think that we're in the process of doing that, but it means that we have to follow through on all of the promises that we've made in order to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals.
I was originally going to say, like, working on these big bills, like improving recycling, it's so rewarding because so many people support it. Like, we've done tons of surveys and everyone supports recycling. Everyone wants recycling to be easier and better. So that is a very exciting and rewarding part of my job. But I would actually say my favorite part is like going after these big businesses who are making all these decisions and nobody's holding them accountable. And that's our job. That's the government's job. So that really energizes me and excites me.
Yeah, I'll just say this cap and invest system that Washington was able to pass with the CCA and being able to map out all the good it's doing. Cap and invest is something I worked on campaigns for in Oregon for many years, and it didn't pass there. So when Representative Fitzgibbon says that this is a sign of like Washington's climate leadership, those aren't like, he's not just rooting for the home team there. Like it's not like this thing is just going to pass in any state or in any blue state. So it's really kind of amazing what Washington's done. And what excites me and energizes me is now we've moved on from there's always more policy advocacy, But now I get to work on like, here's a great policy we passed. Now here, how do we communicate that it's working? How do we make it work better and show all the different investments? So it's a much, it's a very positive sort of project. Each one of those points on the map is like a real thing happening that wouldn't have happened without this kind of incredible work that Washington's doing.
All right, it looks like we're at time. I just want to thank all of you, all of our speakers for coming. Um, yeah, we learned a lot and lots to think about. Definitely feel free to share any resources and we'll get it out to all of our members. For the people in person, we just have a couple more slides, super quick stuff. We have our next event, we just wanna.
Yeah. So I think our speakers actually brought up a lot of the stuff that we're gonna be talking about in our sustainable built environment panel, like emissions from buildings and the impact that having accessible, like walkable greenways in cities can have. So we have experts from tech, we have experts from sustainable building policy and planning going to talk to us. That's gonna be October 21st, so in 2 weeks. We'll send out a location, but yeah, should be exciting.
And if you're interested in joining Climate Collaborative or getting involved, just hearing about the stuff we do, we have our Discord, our Instagram, and our LinkedIn. Okay. Yeah, feel free to take pictures, scan those, we have an email, and you can email us any questions you have.
And here's all the EPSA contact. If you don't already have it, we meet every Wednesday during this time, but 6 p.m., 7 p.m. today is a little different for our collab. But yeah, I am super appreciative of all the speakers that came today. It definitely, for me, reaffirmed why I came out to Washington in the first place as someone that's not from here and wants to get involved in environmental policy. I mean, Washington really is just a front runner, and it's super exciting for me to hear about. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
I'm great watching you again.
See you.
Yes. This is probably recording. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the recording stuff. Okay, this should be good.